In a quiet little town nestled between lush green hills and whispering rivers, called Elwood, there lived a young girl named Mia. She was just 7 years old, a child brimming with innocence, her wide, curious eyes reflecting the world around her. Her smile was radiant, like sunlight breaking through a storm, but sadly, true happiness was a rare visitor within the walls of her own home. Mia's parents, Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Clara, were meant to be her guardians, her shield against the harshness of life. Yet, unbeknownst to the townsfolk of Elwood, Mia was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. It all began one crisp autumn evening, as the wind carried fallen leaves through the streets of Elwood. Mia was in her room, a small sanctuary adorned with faded yellow curtains and a scratched wooden dresser that had seen better days. She sat cross-legged on a worn rug, playing with her dolls, weaving tales of brave knights and kind princesses. These moments of pretend were her refuge, a fleeting escape into a world where she could feel safe and free. The soft creak of her bedroom door interrupted her story. Mr. Daniel stepped inside, his shadow stretching across the floor like a dark stain. He closed the door with deliberate care, a strange smile curling his lips, one that held no warmth, only a troubling edge that clashed with the room's gentle quiet. "Mia," he said, his voice soft but weighted, like a secret pressed into the air. "Come here, sweetheart. I want to show you something special. I want to teach you what it means to grow up. But it has to be our little secret. You can't tell anyone, understand?" Mia looked up at him, her small hands clutching a doll with yarn hair. At 7, she couldn't grasp the meaning behind his words. To her, her father was a towering figure of trust and love, someone meant to guide and protect her. She nodded shyly, her dark curls tumbling over her face. But what Mr. Daniel intended was far from fatherly, far from kind. That night, in the dim glow of her room, he did the unthinkable. He forced himself on his own daughter, shattering her innocence with a cruelty beyond words. Pain seared through Mia's fragile body, and terror gripped her heart. She cried out, her voice breaking. "Daddy, stop. Please stop. It hurts. Daddy, I'm scared." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Mr. Daniel silenced her with cold threats, his eyes hard and unyielding, pinning her into submission. That night was the start of a relentless nightmare. Mia tried to run, to hide in the corners of the house, under her bed, in the narrow closet stuffed with winter coats, but he always found her. Fear became her constant companion, a heavy weight on her tiny shoulders. Every night, when Mrs. Clara left for work, Mr. Daniel would slip into her room. The groan of the door became a signal of dread, and Mia would curl beneath her blankets, praying silently that this time he'd pass by. He never did. The abuse turned into a grim routine, slowly extinguishing the spark in her once bright eyes. You might wonder, where was Mrs. Clara during all this? How could a mother remain blind to such horror in her own home? The answer lay in her all-consuming devotion to her career. Mrs. Clara was a successful businesswoman, the proud owner of Elwood's largest textile shop. Located a few miles from town, her store was a bustling hub of cotton bolts, silk rolls, and linen stacks, drawing customers from far and wide with unbeatable wholesale prices. She spent her days, and most nights, surrounded by fabrics, haggling with suppliers, and poring over ledgers with meticulous care. Her mind was a whirlwind of numbers, profit margins, inventory counts, orders to fulfill. The house, Mia, and even Mr. Daniel faded into the background, mere blurs in her preoccupied world. One rainy evening, as water drummed against the windows, Mrs. Clara sat at the dining table under the flicker of an oil lamp. Papers littered the surface, receipts, stacks of crumpled bills, a notebook where she tallied every penny. Mia approached her, barefoot on the cold floorboards, twisting the hem of her stained nightgown. Her hands shook, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the rain's patter. "Why does Daddy hurt me when you're not here?" Mrs. Clara didn't look up. Her fingers flicked through receipts, her pencil scratching relentlessly. She let out an impatient sigh. "Mia, not now. Can't you see I'm busy? Go do your homework." "But Mommy, please." Mia pressed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Mia," Clara snapped, her voice sharp as a blade. She finally glanced up, irritation etched across her face. I'm working. You always pick the worst time to bother me with nonsense. Go back to your room now. Mia's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to pour out every ounce of her pain, but the words stayed locked inside, trapped by fear and despair. Her shoulders slumped, and she turned away, climbing the stairs with heavy steps. That night, alone in her room, she sobbed into her threadbare pillow, the sound muffled and lost. The torment continued unabated. Mr. Daniel tightened his grip with ever darker threats. If you tell anyone, you'll die, Mia. Do you want to die? He'd hiss, his voice low and chilling. Mia, trembling, shook her head, tears streaking her pale cheeks. No, Daddy, I won't tell. But inside, she was screaming for rescue, aching for someone to hear what she couldn't say. Desperate, she gathered her courage to try again. On another rainy night, as Mrs. Clara hunched over her accounts, Mia edged closer, her small fists clenched for strength. Mom, can I talk to you? It's about Daddy. Her voice quivered, fragile as a leaf in the wind. Clara sighed loudly, her fingers tightening around a stack of bills. Mia, you're exhausting me with your constant whining. What is it now? Mia's pulse raced. It's about what Daddy does when you're not here. The words choked her, too heavy, too terrifying to release. Clara rolled her eyes, exasperation boiling over. Mia, I'm sick of your stories. Your father works hard for us, and you're just making trouble. She slammed her hand on the table, making Mia flinch. If you're so miserable here, go live somewhere else. Stop fishing for attention. Those words stabbed Mia's heart. She stepped back, tears blurring her vision. In that moment, a crushing truth settled in. No one would save her. Not her father, who broke her, nor her mother, who refused to see. She was alone, forsaken in a world deaf to her cries. After that, Mia stopped trying. She stopped speaking of it. Her laughter, once a bright melody, faded into silence. She became a ghost, drifting through the house, her spirit fractured by months of anguish. Weeks bled into months, and the nightmare pressed on, unrelenting. But fate, at times, offers an unexpected glimmer. One day, by sheer chance, Mrs. Clara came home early. A canceled delivery at the shop freed her from her duties, and she decided to spend a rare evening at home. Crossing the threshold, she felt an eerie stillness. Something was off. The downstairs lights were dark, and a chill prickled her spine. Curious, she climbed the stairs, her heels clicking on the worn wood. As she neared Mia's room, she caught faint sounds, soft whimpers, hushed murmurs. Her heart quickened. Slowly, she pushed the half-open door, and the sight before her stopped her cold. Mr. Daniel was there, looming over Mia, committing the horror she tried to confess so many times. Mia's eyes were squeezed shut, her body shaking with quiet sobs. Clara's world shattered. A primal scream ripped from her throat. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, lunging forward. She shoved Mr. Daniel aside, sending him crashing into the wall, and gathered Mia into her arms, holding her tight, as if she could finally shield her. Tears streamed down her face as the truth, horrific and undeniable, crashed over her. The police arrived swiftly. Mr. Daniel was handcuffed and hauled away, but not before offering a vile excuse. Clara was never here. She cared only about her shop. I needed company. Those pathetic, revolting words only fueled the disgust of everyone present. The trial was swift and merciless. The judge, appalled by the evidence, sentenced Mr. Daniel to life in prison. He'd rot behind bars, far from Mia, far from any chance to harm again. Justice was served, but the scars remained. Mia was placed in therapy, guided by compassionate professionals. Over time, with care and patience, she began to mend, piecing together shards of peace. Clara, consumed by guilt, sold her shop. She couldn't bear to look at those fabrics without seeing the cost they'd exacted on her daughter. She devoted herself to Mia, striving to heal what she'd ignored for too long. The story of Mia is a tragedy, but also a warning. Listen to those who reach out in pain, especially children. Their hesitant words often carry truths we'd rather not face. Ignoring their pleas can lead to irreparable suffering. No success, no wealth, is worth losing those you love. Thank you for hearing this story. I hope it's moved you, reminded you to be present, to listen. Be a good parent. Be a parent who hears. Don't be like Clara. Don't be like Mr. Daniel.